Hello, I'm Carol Queen, and I'm really happy to introduce to you Gina Ogden, who has been a sexologist, a sex researcher. She's a writer. She has done really important work, especially around women and sexuality, and she really became familiar to me with her book, Women Who Love Sex.
With Women Who Love Sex, which came out in 1994 in its first edition. It's now in its third edition. I learned that nobody had ever done a survey on sexuality and spirituality. So in my innocence, I floated one. I ended up with 3,810 respondents.
Which is a good number.
Had cleared. And I realized I had one of the large sex surveys of the US. I was having these amazing findings that came out, and the findings were not strange to me, but what was strange about them, they didn't fit into the books that fit into the DSM categories of what sex is, or sex is supposed to be, or what sexual function is.
The DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, used by sex therapists and doctors alike to figure out how to bill their insurance companies and how to diagnose their patients. But the DSM is full of things that attempt to categorize people in terms of their sexual dysfunctions or distress, and also, more controversially, in terms of their interesting interests. So
yes, or their partners that they choose, or how many partners they choose, or anything.
And plenty of the women who love sex likely have categories in the DSM that would describe them to a T, except maybe pathologize them a little. I'd love more of your thoughts about this new change, proposed change in the DSM and the notion of hypersexuality, given that you wrote a book called Women Who Love Sex, and you could easily dump some of those women into a diagnosis of hypersexuality if you were conservative in the way that you defined hypersexuality.
What I see, I go back to my wheel, body, mind, heart, spirit. I see that whenever you begin to get into those judgments about what's too much, what's not enough, what should we be doing, what shouldn't we be doing, we're stuck in this sort of mental construct. And for as long as we're stuck there, and for as long as we're counting and measuring, we're missing most of what our sexuality and most of what our humanity is all about. And that sex, sexuality, sexual response is more than physical. It's emotional, it's mental, it's spiritual. And you cannot talk about one without the other. You can't talk about SM and all of those cool behaviors. You can't talk about polyamory. You can't talk about face-to-face intercourse in the dark and marriage for the procreation of children, man on top, without also talking about how that feels and what it means in your life.
Do you see a way to bridge this sort of greater knowledge that we've been talking about with the world of the DSM? Is there a way to help people understand what the DSM does, is put people in boxes, and how do we help get people out of boxes, including the therapists who are using it?
I think first we need to ask the question, how is it comfortable for people to be in boxes? Some people like to be in boxes. For some people, boxes really, really work. When you want to get out of a box, then you ask different kinds of questions.
I will say that at least the DSM thinks it needs to change from time to time.
Yes.
And that I think you could say is a plus. It understands that understandings and time march on, and that it needs to catch up. And by it, of course, I mean all the people who are the bureaucratic and philosophical driving force behind that document.
And at least it is nominally opening itself up.
And they're actually taking public comment through April. So people who have some thoughts about hypersexuality and other issues.
Write them.
Well, I think that's a fine call to action, and a fine way for us to end what has been a really fascinating conversation. I'm so pleased that you were able to make the time to come and
totally
join
my
us,
pleasure.
Gina. Thank you very much. And thank you.
Yes.